Welcome to Thriving a Different Way with Dr. Temple Grandin. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. It was a great turnout. So we're just going to go through. So for this presentation, please silence your phones. Be respectful. Drinks and light snacks are allowed. And please hold your questions for the Q&A section of this presentation. And the meet and greet will conclude this talk and presentation. Dr. Temple Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. Facilities she has designed for handling livestock are used by many companies around the world. She has also been instrumental in implementing animal welfare auditing programs that are used by McDonald's, Wendy's, Whole Foods, and other corporations. Temple has appeared on numerous TV shows such as 2020 and Primetime. Her books include Thinking in Pictures, Livestock Handling and Transport, and The Autistic Brain. Her books, Animals in Translation and Visual Thinking, have been on the New York Times bestseller list. Temple was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in September 2017, and in 2022 was named Colorado State University Distinguished Professor. Please help me welcome Dr. Temple Grandin. I'm going to pull up your slides here.
Let's just put a little movie screen.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here. I've got the water over here away from the electronics, as those two things need to be separate. And I guess most of you know I was severe autism when I was a little kid, no speech until age 4. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. I got it by the time I was 2.5. And I can't emphasize enough. You know somebody that's got a 2-year-old that's not talking, the worst thing you can do is to do nothing. I can't emphasize how important early intervention is. And how do you judge a program? There's been a lot of controversy about some of the different programs. How do you judge a decent early intervention program? I want to get more speech, more ability to wait and take turns at games, and skills like dressing, combing their hair, just skills, eating with utensils. And you should get this progress, and the kid should like going to therapy. If the kid hates therapy, then you probably need to get another therapist. But some teachers just have the ability to work with these little kids. But where I'm seeing a big problem is making the transition to adulthood. That's where we've got the big problem. And the problem we've got with the autism spectrum is at one end you have Elon Musk and Einstein, and at the other end you have somebody who can't dress themselves. You see, and that's due to having the Asperger's merged in, which is basically autism with no speech delay. Socially awkward. Now the thing is, it's a true continuous trait. When does slightly nerdy become autism? There's no black and white dividing line. And I'm going to be talking about different ways that people think, because I've worked on industry, and I've worked with people that were autistic that had great jobs, like a metal fabrication shop, and they built things for me. And that's why I wrote my book, Visual Thinking, because I've got a lot of big concerns about skill loss. But I also want to say kids that are different get out and get into really, really good careers. Now, the first step, and I tell business leaders all the time, the first step is realizing that people think differently. Programming, mathematicians think differently than the more artistic kind of people. And I was shocked when I discovered in my late 30s that other people did not think in pictures the same way I think. Yeah, and that's that was going, wow, something different. Now, being a visual thinker helped me in my animal behavior work, because animals live in a sensory-based world, not a word-based world. When I talk to veterinary students, animal science students, get away from language if you want to understand animals. And that's my own shadow spooking the cattle right there. My own shadow taking a picture with an iPhone. And I have to train people to look for these things. Cattle refuse to go through the handling facility. It may be due to a coat on a fence, or maybe a piece of wire that's jiggling. Some little thing that most people don't see. Okay, now, in a lot of my work, do a lot of engineering type of stuff. I'm also a great big NASA fan. And I have a chapter in visual thinking about disasters like the Fukushima nuclear power plant mess. And the reason why that happened is they had no watertight doors. See, mathematically trained engineers calculate risk. Visual thinkers see it. It only took me 30 minutes looking up on Google to find out that the 10-meter seawall would be breached. How could you do this? And the electrically run emergency cooling pump doesn't run underwater. See how basic that is? Well, 5.5 years ago, I had a chance to visit this launch pad that the Artemis rocket successfully launched on. And I found something in the launch pad that shouldn't be there. Nobody else knew this guy was living in the base of the launch pad. And they were using the launch pad base as a workshop for fueling equipment. I saw stuff I don't want this raccoon around. And I just noticed some movement on the steps. We were there at 7 o'clock in the morning, watched him go down the steps and disappear in the bushes. And we need visual thinkers in science. One of the things that's happening in science today is it's getting more and more and more mathematically related. All kinds of fancy statistics, but what about the methods? And millions of dollars worth of cancer research was wrecked because one lab used one mixing device and the other lab used another mixing device. And it changed the results of cancer research. It matters. You got to put in the paper exactly what you used. I just reviewed a paper this morning, and they leave out important things in the methods. And there was some bedding. They put some livestock on, and I said, did you use the rice hulls, or did you use the rice hulls and the whole plant for the bedding? It matters. I want that described. It matters, and it can affect the results of experiments. But you see, methods is something I see. And I'm very concerned that some of the visual thinkers like me are getting screened out. I got an email about a young man who was studying to film at a local community college, and he couldn't pass the algebra requirement. I don't know why you need algebra to be in film. Now, there's 3 different kinds of thinking. I am what's called an object visualizer. I think in pictures. That's shown very nicely in the HBO movie, where it say shoe, whole bunch of shoes come up. Now, one of the problems with my kind of mind is you can't do algebra. But people with my kind of mind are really good at inventing mechanical equipment. I know people that are autistic that own shops that have 20 patents, and they're selling their equipment all around the world. Art, photography, I just saw some beautiful art, and working with animals, and highly skilled trades. I'm not talking about roofing and floor tiles. I'm talking about welding, where you read drawings and create equipment, fixing cars, heating, cooling, electrical, plumbing, the real high-end skilled trades. These are things that visual thinkers are good at. Then you have your mathematical minds. These people think in patterns, not pictures, but patterns. Computer programming, engineering, chemistry and physics, music. Music and math go together. And then when we get back to the visual thinkers, art and mechanics go together. Art and mechanics and music and math. And then, of course, you have your verbal minds. And education's been getting more and more verbal. Writers, banking, psychologists, lawyers, teachers. Now, the thing is, there's research that shows that these different kinds of thinking exist. And it's all covered in my new book, Visual Thinking, and they got a few copies over there. But there's research about this. And a lot of people are mixtures of the different kinds of minds. But you get an individual the label. This is where you might be an extreme object visualizer, or maybe an extreme mathematician. You'll never be both. They're kind of opposite traits. Turns out I've got a huge visual thinking circuit in my brain. There's another picture of my visual thinking circuit. Now let's look at how people take in information. Let's say I want to teach you how a water pump works. My kind of mind would rather look at pictures and diagrams Verbal thinkers want to read about it. I don't want to read about a water pump. Just show me a diagram of how it works. And the mathematician tends to look at both. And let's look at how different kinds of thinkers do an art project. I think this is very interesting. And these people were students in high schools, different high schools. One was an art school, another kind of a science school, another one humanities and literary. And their project was to make a picture of a planet, to invent planets. There were teams of students. So the artists make fantastic planets with pyramids on it and crystals and skyscrapers. The science students just draw it round, describe the atmosphere, the gravity, not very pretty. The engineering mind and the writing students started writing about it. Then they realized it was supposed to be an art project, so they made splotches. But what I found really disturbing is the verbal thinkers did no planning of their projects, where the other two kinds of thinkers had elaborate planning sessions because you had more than one student. There were teams of students working on these pictures. Verbal thinkers did not plan. See, verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize, top down. And this is one of the big problems they got with autism. So you put Einstein and somebody who maybe has epilepsy and can't dress themselves in the same category. That doesn't really make much sense. You know, there's a big concept, but how do you actually implement the big concept? Both my kind of mind and the mathematicians are bottom up. In other words, one thing you're going to need to be doing with individuals that are autistic is get them out doing things. Because a bottom-up thinker thinks better when you fill up the database. I can remember when the internet first started, and there wasn't much in it when you searched for things. I remember when you searched cattle, there was one website on cattle breeds or something like that in the very beginning. So it's the same thing with the autistic brain. We got to get these kids out doing things. And if they don't get out doing things, they don't learn that much. I've had parents tell me that when they got their kid out on a job, they blossomed. And one of the big problems I'm seeing today with fully verbal kids with labels is they're getting so overprotected, they're not learning any basic skills. They're not learning things like shopping. I'll tell you about a 12-year-old girl. I met her at the airport, and her mom wanted a picture. I said, fine. And I asked the girl if she'd ever shopped, and she said no. So I handed her a $5 bill, and I said, go in that store across the hall and buy something. And she brought a drink back with the change. That's the first time she had shopped. And what I'm finding is some of these parents just can't let go, and they do everything for the kid. Now, I don't want to put them into something that's just chucking them in the deep end of the pool. But on the other hand, they're not learning things that I was doing when I was a real little kid. Now, let's look at the early inventors. One of my favorite books in 4th grade was about inventors, and we're here in the library. And the early inventors invented mechanical devices, grain harvesting, cotton ginning, sewing machines, steamships, locomotives. Those are mechanical devices. They were probably my kind of mind. And here's the guy who invented the 3D printer. And people forget it's a mechanical device that a computer controls. Now, we've got a problem. I'm very concerned about skill loss. That's another reason why I did my book, Visual Thinking. There's stuff we don't make anymore. And there's two parts of engineering. There's the mathematical degreed engineer, and then there's what I call the clever engineer. These are the people working in the shop. They'll invent all kinds of clever equipment, similar to the old inventors. And we don't have people now to fix elevators. In the last year, I've been on some very questionable elevators. And a good friend of mine just got hurt on an elevator door. That could have been deadly. I don't trust them. I usually shove my briefcase into it because I know how the mechanism works. And it's amazing they work as well as they do. But if you kind of check around who's fixing them, they're all turning gray, and they're not getting replaced. And there's a link here between what's going on in the schools. There's too many kids playing video games in the basement when they ought to be out working, and some of them in really high-end jobs. And what I'm seeing on the video game addictions, a lot of them are going nowhere. I'll tell you how to get them off the video games, young adults. Car mechanics. That's been the one place where there's been success, because they're probably my kind of mind. And they found that cars were a lot more interesting than video games. Now, the video game industry probably doesn't think much of me, but these kids are not getting jobs, in high-level jobs in video game design. It's not happening. You've got 100 kids for every real job. So they do it on the gig economy, pay you nothing, and got no health insurance. You'd be better off working at the steel mill or working at Genentech. I was just out at Genentech. That's the company that developed big blockbuster cancer drugs. Yep, and they have really, really cool labs. Now let's look at some of the stuff we're not making. Over half of large industrial 3D printers come from Europe. The state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine comes from Holland. We invented the technology at one of our universities, but the Dutch make it. Now this goes back to our educational system. You see, you can, in Holland and Germany and a lot of those countries, at 9th grade you can decide to go university route or tech route, and they don't stick their nose up at the tech route. And I just had a very upsetting conversation this morning while I was looking up the directions to figure out how to find the library. And a guy called me, and he works in industry, and he gives talks at schools in New York State. And this one school district told him he could not tell the students that skilled trades were an option. That's this morning I was told this. I think something's wrong here. And the attitude is, well, stupid kids take shop. Let me tell you, I worked with people that were brilliant, and we've made some big mistakes. And the people I've worked with are retiring, and they're not getting replaced. There used to be a huge shop called the Montfort Fab Shop. Now Montfort's no longer, it's Montfort's. And before JBS bought it, the people in between shut down the Montfort Fab Shop. It was a gigantic mistake. They thought they could just outsource out the equipment. Well, yeah, now they have to import the equipment. We don't make the state-of-the-art electron microscope. And in 2019, I went to 4 places that really convinced me we had a skill loss issue. And that's why I wrote the visual thinking book. And you might say, why am I telling you at an autism meeting? Because there's a link here between what's going on in industry and what's going on in the autism world. I don't want to bust you out of the autism box. Everything you see in this picture except the building itself is imported from Holland and a little bit from Quebec. We don't make this equipment. Pork processing plant. We used to make all this stuff. The parachute for the Mars lander, the fabric was woven on high-tech European looms. And the Steve Jobs Theater, this is the thing that really blew my mind. Structural glass walls from Italy and Germany, and the carbon fiber roof is from Dubai, and I'm standing in the middle of it screaming, we don't make it anymore. And this is when I realized we got a problem here, and it goes back to taking the shop classes and all the hands-on classes out of the schools. And I'm really glad you got a makerspace here. That's really great. Checked it out. Need some 3D printers in there. Let's get a little, probably welding. You can't do that here, but you know, there's some small woodworking projects you could do. There's a few other things you could do. And when I was in elementary school, I loved art, sewing, and woodworking. Taking out the hands-on classes is the worst things the schools ever did, because I worked with people that have 20 patents, and it started with a single welding class, and then they started making specialized hydraulic equipment. I can't tell you what it is because they're not disclosed, but they're absolutely definitely autistic, and he sells this stuff all over the world. But the problem is he's close, you know, not quite as old as I am, but late 60s. But kids need to get exposed to a lot of stuff to find out what they're good at. Musical instruments. Yep, I had a little flute when I was a kid. I could never figure out how to play it. Another kid's going to take off with that. Woodworking, welding, theater, auto shop, all of these different things. Because there's a lot of students that would thrive in this stuff. So I'm a big fan of exposing kids to all kinds of things. Computer coding. So, okay, we have robotics. My kind of mind's going to build the robot, and the mathematical kid's going to program it. See, this is where you need both working together. I absolutely cannot do algebra. Yep, and I just got this email I was writing last night. Someone wrote to my webpage, was failing algebra multiple times for a film degree. I think we need to be thinking about where we need algebra. We don't need it for a veterinary nurse or a veterinary technician either. Yeah, arithmetic, yes. Dosing drugs, you better be able to do it in your sleep and do it accurately. But you're not going to need it for much else. And if you're going to do chemistry and physics and orbital mechanics, then you're going to need to do algebra. But what people forget with something like the Mars rover, the mathematicians got it there, but somebody in the shop hand-built the cameras. That doesn't get enough credit. And each camera would fit in a shoebox. They're not very big. They fit in a large shoebox. Now let's look at where different kinds of minds can work together. My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. MIT-trained mathematical engineer. He worked with an autistic guy who come up with this goofy new idea for an autopilot. Aviation stuck their nose up at it. And they tinkered and they tinkered and then tinkered in a loft where they fixed trains, in a building where they fixed trains. They got it to work. They were terrible business people. It got stolen. And the stolen version was in every plane during World War II. Yeah, they needed a lawyer. This is where you needed the different kinds of minds. Now let's look at what I've learned with collaboration in large food plants. And some of this I learned in the Montfort Fab Shop. This would have been in the 80s and the 90s. And what I learned is this object visualizers in that shop. Montfort's was inventing and patenting equipment. And the people who did that barely graduated from high school. They were the shop people. And then the degreed engineer, boilers, refrigeration, calculate the roof trusses, power, and water. You see, that part of engineering we still know how to do. But the Montfort Fab Shop is gone. Because in the short run, it was cheaper to farm the work out to local shops. But now there's no more local shops. So now you've got a big problem. Other companies also shut down in-house engineering. Gigantic, gigantic mistake. And I've worked for every major meat company, and I have seen this division of labor in IBP, which is now Tyson, and also at Cargill. Now, working on the visual thinking book, Betsy, my verbal co-author, and I collaborated using our complementary skills. I wrote the first drafts kind of disorganized. Betsy smoothed them all out. That's the different kinds of minds working together. Okay, let's look at making a building. The architects make it look nice. The engineers will just build you a concrete box. But it'll be safe, electrical, mechanical systems, structural loads. And I have to say, as somebody in the building industry, I was absolutely horrified. 20,000 people squashed in apartment buildings where the concrete work was done too cheap. That's what killed them, I'll tell you right now. Cheap concrete work. Not big enough columns, not enough rebar in them, and probably a poor mix on the concrete. Yeah, shoddy construction. It was 4:30 in the morning. They were sleeping and those buildings crushed them. Yep, the engineers will make sure that the size of the columns is right. In fact, being an associative thinker, I was looking at the New York Times this morning, and they've got this high-rise building to keep pigs in. I don't know if that's a good idea, but I can tell you one thing. The columns are big enough that the pigs are going to survive an earthquake. Yeah. Okay, 20% of the people I worked with were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. They owned metal fabrication companies. And these were other people other than the Montfort Fab Shop. Multiple patents. Designing and building complicated equipment. And none of them could do algebra. This is a problem. I have grandparents coming up to me all the time, and they find out they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. But granddaddy and grandmother had a job because they learned working skills, not learning enough working skills. Because the thing about a bottom-up thinker, their mind is only as good as fill up the database. And I want to fill up the database with all kinds of good stuff. Okay, now you can see how I have associative thinking. I'm seeing all those awful pictures from Turkey. The way they built a floor slab, it was so cheap I couldn't believe it, with a guy crushed under it. I'm looking at a picture of that, horrible. Now I'm seeing a pig building. It looks like some dystopian corporate headquarters for something bad. And they show a scene inside, they show a picture inside the building. It's got a massive column. It will stay up. You see, that's an example of associative thinking. And having spent 25 years in heavy construction, I have to say that some of the most funnest stuff I ever did in my career was in heavy construction. And the grandparents also raised in the 50s, social skills were taught in a much more structured manner. I'm going to talk about that later. Now, where a diagnosis can help an adult is with relationships. For a lot of adults in a relationship, they discover they're autistic, it's almost a relief that explains so many things. So that's a good thing. But I'm seeing too many kids where I think it's holding them back. You know, what would I rather be doing? Playing video games in the basement or having out building things? I want to ask you, what would happen to some top innovators in today's educational workplace? Would they be less successful today? Michelangelo, grubby little 12-year-old that dropped out of school. His dad wanted him to be a lawyer, and he goes, ugh. And what this brings up is on careers. It starts with exposure. He was running around all these churches that were commissioning great art. That's exposure. He grew up with stone cutting tools. That's exposure. Then he started making some stuff, and an artist took him into his studio and mentored him. So it starts with exposure, then mentoring. That's really, really important. Steve Jobs will probably be on the spectrum. Einstein had no speech till age 3. Now, some people argue about whether he's autistic or not, but he'd land in an autism class today. No question about that. Edison dropped out of school, probably had autism, but he learned working skills. He was selling newspapers on the train, and he had a mentor that taught him how to use a telegraph. That's what got him started. Elon Musk announced he's on the spectrum. You know, the thing is, SpaceX and cars, they're a lot easier than Twitter that has a lot of social stuff. Well, now he's coming out with this new stainless steel futuristic pickup truck. And I think maybe he can pull that one off. The car industry's saying you can't fabricate stainless steel. I'm going BS. They fabricated plenty of it in the Montfort Fab Shop. So I know it can be fabricated. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. That's another reason for keeping all the hands-on classes. Here are some tips if you're an employer for working with minds that are different. If I was a computer, if you know computers, I'd be an Intel 286 chip, but I've got 3 server farms for memory. So a very small processor and a very big memory. Or another analogy is a phone with 1 bar of service. It's got access to the whole web, but 1 bar of service is going to take time to download the website. So if I'm going to do a first job for somebody, I'm not shoving them on the busy McDonald's takeout window. That's setting up for failure. Another job that failed was spinning pizzas. That didn't work. Folding pizza boxes did. Chaotic stores during the holidays also did not work. You know, but sometimes a family can just make an accommodation in the neighborhood. And just about 2 weeks ago, I talked to a family, and her daughter was running the cash register at McDonald's. She was autistic. But when he got super busy, they let her clean tables. You see, that was just a little accommodation they made. You know, not a big accommodation, but a really little, really important accommodation. We got to stretch them out of their comfort zone and give choices. We can go to Target or Walmart, but we are going shopping. Limit the video games, provide some choices. Also, vague instructions at work don't work, like tidy up the shelves, that doesn't work. You need to say each flavor of Campbell's soups has to line up with its price tag on the shelf. You see, that's specific. What's the ultimate goal of education? Where's a student 10 years after high school? When I was a student that a lot of people thought would go absolutely nowhere. And I was building the big dipping vat projects that were shown in the movie. So how do you sell your work? You want to short circuit the interview and show your work off to the right people. And that's a drawing I did in 1978. And I can remember when I drew that drawing, I looked at it, almost couldn't believe I had drawn that. I thought, I guess I'm not stupid, because one of the big things that motivated me is I wanted to prove I was not stupid. Yeah, you sell your work, not yourself. Okay, now I saw beautiful artwork here, and some of it's on display at the Garden of the Gods. You should have asked them for $10,000, not $1,000. And there's another great autistic artist named Grandin, the eco artist, and I was advising them on prices, and he did a commission, and I said, Julie, that's his mother, ask for 20. They got it. Ask for 20,000, not $20, 20,000. Yeah. And he's doing some work here that's that kind of quality. When you do work for the church, I wouldn't charge a church that, but another fancy hotel, it's 20,000. Yeah. Okay. I have designed the front end of every Cargill plant in North America, including the one in Fort Morgan. Another piece of equipment I developed, and some of that was built in the Montfort Fab Shop, was the center track restrainer system. All the big plants have this. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody that thought that was retarded. So I took this drawing right here in the late 80s and sent it to the head of Cargill. I sent him a portfolio to show off my work. But you don't show the portfolio to HR. It doesn't do you any good. You got to show it to the people who care about it. They got that picture, and that's the replica they built for the movie. I love the fact that all my projects were real in that. That's my brochure from the 80s. Yeah, color printing was too expensive back then. It was called 4-color. That means it has to go through the printing press 4 times. That's not the case today. And then they got sent that picture. A 30-second wow. Now let's look at things I've done to adapt. And one of the things I did is I do sit-ups every night. Hate every one of them. But that burst of hard exercise helps me to sleep. Let's look at work experience. This is where we're really falling down. When I was 13, Mother just went into a seamstress that just worked out of her home. I was good at sewing and offered up my services to her. And I would take apart dresses and hand hem them. That was just done in the neighborhood. Those kind of things can be easily done today, because it's important to have a work on a schedule outside the family, where the family's not boss. Well, I got kicked out of 9th grade for calling a girl a retard. I had a really good elementary school experience, and my high school experience was a complete disaster in a large high school. And, adolescence, worst part of my life. So I was sent off to special school, which my parents could afford. But a lot of the things that we did when I was younger were not, real expensive things. They put me to work cleaning 9 horse stalls every day, feeding the horses, putting them in and out of the barn. I learned how to work. Then at 16, I went out to my aunt's ranch. And that's where I got exposed to the beef industry. That gets back to exposure. I did some roofing. It was a lot of fun. I think that was illegal at 16 to do roofing. And I'll tell you right now, when I'm talking skilled trades, I'm not talking about roofing. Roofing, flat work, concrete, that's just hard work. But one of the things I did helped develop the entrepreneur spirit. I had a little sign painting business. And you want to encourage this being an entrepreneur. And the way I sold jobs was showing people pictures of signs I had made. And my first sign I made for pay was for a hair salon. And I had to make a sign a hair salon would want. You see, and I'm finding when I talk to a lot of people about art, well, the kid just wants to make the art anime or whatever the kid wants. Well, Grandin did an American Eagle for a client. I think that was about a $20,000 or $10,000 job. Yeah, that's something that the client wanted. And then when I was in college, I worked in a research lab. I'm seeing bad things where students sometimes graduate from college and they don't make it in the workplace. You want a gradual transition from the world of school to the world of work, where it's not sudden. Fully verbal kids, how about 2 summer jobs before they graduate? But I'm seeing a lot of parents that don't want to let go. Like when I said to one mom, next time you buy gas, hand your kid a $5 bill and have him go in the shop and buy something. And I had one mom says, I don't know if I have the guts to do that. I go, really? Really? over a jug of milk. Printer paper, that was another case. Mom didn't want to have her kid buy printer paper by himself. And it got down to not being able to let go. Back doors to jobs. There's a really important scene in the movie where I go up to the editor of the Farmer Ranchman magazine and I get his card. These back doors are everywhere. I knew if I wrote for that magazine it would help my career. Now, just in the last month, I learned about 2 great backdoor careers. One of them was a guy, real young guy, and he started as a laborer sanding and polishing marble. Then he learned how to operate the saws. Then he took the shop's marble scraps and made beautiful chess tables. Then he learned how to fix these machines. Now he flies all over the country fixing computerized marble cutting equipment. This is the recent one. This is a young guy, late 20s, early 30s, a young guy right now. And the other one I just learned about the other day, got a job as a laborer in a company that made fiberglass tanks. He repaired all the equipment in that shop. They love him. They love him to pieces. They're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars on maintenance. He was probably, the visual thinking kind of guy. They can just see how machines work. These are recent jobs right now. Backdoors, not something from my generation. This is stuff now to backdoor jobs. Because I don't want you saying, well, that's stuff a Temple could do in the 80s. We can't do that. No. The kid with the marble stuff, it's now. Elementary life skills training. This is stuff that anybody can do. Doesn't cost anything. When I was 7 and 8, every kid in our neighborhood, when the parents had a party, and there was like 4 couples over, and they were small parties, and you had to put on your good clothes, greet the guests, shake hands with them. That taught social skills, selling candy to neighbors for charity. Let's start working on that. That helped with the entrepreneur stuff. My sister and I had a disastrous Kool-Aid stand. I was about 10, she was about 9, and we ran out of sugar. Never forgot it. And then we made it with half the sugar, and it tasted disgusting. So you better watch your supply chain there. But these sorts of things teach important skills. And when I was 8, I got 50 cents a week for allowance. And there were certain items that Mother considered allowance items. And today that's $5. I realized that. But I could buy 5 Superman comics or 10 candy bars. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. That taught money. You teach money by the things it can buy. And one of my favorite games was a table hockey set that I'd been given for Christmas. I'd had it about 2 years. And one day I saw that table hockey set in the toy store window. It was $21. And I calculated that was almost a year's worth of allowance. So a $20 bill is still a hockey table. Yep, I think it's like a $200 hockey table now. But that's how you make money real. Friends through shared interests. I can't emphasize that enough. That's where they're going to get friends. And for me, it was horses, model rockets, and electronics. Friends through shared interests. One enterprising teacher started a Star Wars club for her elementary school student. It really worked. When I was at the special school, we had this ugly shed. And I redecorated it. I made it look nice. And I didn't decorate it with flying saucers or horses. I put the school logo on it. Getting back to being an entrepreneur, that's me up there. My sign business had expanded. I was painting signs for the Arizona State Fair in the early 70s. I was in my 20s. For ridiculous, stupid carnival exhibits. But I'm realizing that what I learned from this helped me with my cattle handling business. Because how to get this job? I showed a portfolio to an old sign painter. That's the way I sold cattle handling jobs, starting one little project at a time. And there's my sign painting truck. But driving. If I hadn't learned to drive, I wouldn't have done half the things I did. It's going to take a lot longer because you got to remember, got that little tiny 1 bar of service for a processor. And so to avoid the multitasking problem with traffic, You got to practice operation of the vehicle much, much, much longer to get that into motor memory, into autopilot, get it into motor memory before you touch traffic. Let's start in the middle of deserted parking lots, open fields, back roads. Those are the places where you start. Yeah. And then this morphed into the cattle facilities. One little project at a time. Slow transition to work. Jobs on a schedule outside the home, age 11 or 12. Church volunteer jobs, farmers markets, learning things like shopping. I wish I didn't have to talk about shopping, but I'm finding more and more kids recently that have never shopped by themselves, never ordered food in a restaurant. This is ridiculous. Don't overprotect and overaccommodate. But on the other hand, we don't chuck them in the deep end and put them on the takeout window, because that'll set them up for failure. And too often times, I've had to talk to some parents just the other day, and they said, voc rehab won't do this or whatever. I said, wait a minute. Why don't you just find somebody you know that works in a store or runs a store and make it happen? Find the back door. This is another thing I learned from construction. You got to make it happen. You don't just think about it, you got to do it. Mentors. I had some great mentors. My speech teacher, my mother always pushing me to do new things, my science teacher who got me motivated to study, tried to teach me algebra, that didn't work, but he motivated me to study. And I'm not going to be a chemist. But you see, you need the people in the shop. And now that the Montfort Fab Shop is gone, now we realize what we have lost. The building's still there. I want to cry when I drive by that building. They fix trucks in it now, so at least it's being used. But they don't make anything in there anymore, and they sold all the shop equipment. It was very sad. Another important mentor was Jim the contractor, a former Marine Corps captain starting a tiny little steel and concrete business, and he seeked me out to design jobs. He also showed me how to set up my own business. I had no idea how to do that. Mentors. My mother at age 8 taught me to read with phonics. I didn't read at age 8. My elementary school teachers. Mentors are extremely important. Let's talk about sensory issues. The thing about sensory issues is that they're highly, highly, highly variable. So let's say you have an individual that has a problem with noise sensitivity. Sometimes if they control the noisy thing, then they can tolerate it better. But when I was in graduate school, I had a roommate that had a very noisy hairdryer. I could tolerate it for a while, but it was one of those bonnet things she'd put on, and she'd run it for like an hour. Yeah, that got to be a bit long. But you get kids that are afraid to go places because a dog might bark, well then you might use an audio recording for that. But sometimes something like the vacuum cleaner go from the horrible thing they hate to something they love if you let the kid turn it on and use it, where the kid controls it. And the problem with wearing earphones all the time is if you do that, it's going to make your ear more sensitive. It's going to make it worse, not better. It's okay to have it with you, but don't wear them all the time. With you, but don't wear them all the time. And then you go to some super loud, noisy places. Like I was in a hotel the other day where the fire alarm went off. Okay, that would be the time to put it on. And give choices in clothing. Thrift shops will have softer clothing. Wash clothing that goes against the skin. Give the kids some choices of clothing where they can go feel it and then wash it. You have some individuals that absolutely hate escalators. They got visual processing problems and they don't see how to get on and off the escalator. And you might have somebody that complains about the print jiggling on the page when they read, even though the eye exam is more or less normal. Problems back here in the brain, where the graphics files are assembled and there's image stabilization software in the brain. Otherwise, because your eye moves, everything will be wiggling, but it's not. Scientists don't even know how that works, but they know the brain has it. And there's something wrong with that. And that's why they get the print will move. Some individuals on the spectrum, and also individuals with head injuries, with head trauma. We'll have image breakup similar to migraines, or maybe something that looks like this, especially when they get tired. Here's an example of words jiggling on the page. All right, let's look at simple things we can do. Certain LED lights flicker, and if you can see that flicker on LED lights, that really drives you crazy. I don't see it. Some individuals see this, others don't. Some dyslexic kids have these problems, but not all of them. So how do you fix it if the LED lights flicker? You got to find one that doesn't flicker and put it on the desk. So how do you find out which ones flicker if you don't see it? Take a high-end phone and film the room in slow motion video. And I'd go like this, and then play it back slow-mo. I want to see the hand going like that. So I know I'm playing it back in slow motion. You'll see the flicker. Another simple thing you can try is try putting the reading materials on gray paper, tan paper, light blue paper, pale pastel papers. And the individual has to pick the paper. Sometimes Irwin lenses work. They're a bit pricey. Sometimes you can just go find some pink sunglasses or something like that. Sometimes that works. But the pale pastel paper, anybody can do that. So somebody might say to me, well, that's not evidence-based. I go, wait a minute, it's colored paper. It's cheap, totally safe. Takes me maybe half an hour to try it. And sometimes it works, not for everybody. This is where this stuff is so variable. If you have very severe sensory problems, you may need breaks to screen out, because you can't screen out the distractions. Some individuals will need to have some breaks. You'll notice when I talked about the little kids, I wasn't pushing eye contact. That loads that little processor. In fact, in Asia, eye contact's rude, so but I want results. The mono channel. I find if I'm really tired and I'm trying to listen to what the gate agent's saying at the airport, if I look at her in the eyes, it's harder for me to hear. That loads the processor. I find that electronic terminology explains it better. But you've got a huge memory, huge capacity for memory, but I have to access it through a one-bar phone. And it's not going to do too many things at once. All right, this is an evidence-based study, and the title of the paper is Environmental Enrichment as an Effective Treatment for Autism. And what you do is stimulate two senses at the same time, like maybe smell some aromatherapy thing and touch a cold water glass. You're stimulating two senses at the same time. It's an adjunct to other therapies. You're always changing the two things, and it's usually not sound and vision together. Usually one of the senses is usually touch or smell. All right, if you're working with individuals that remain nonverbal, these books are must-reads. They're written by people who type independently. They're not being cued. And the reason I jumped, big New York Times bestseller, I like the sequel better. Noki's older and a lot more insight. And one of the things he complained about was that his carers, he's from Japan, so the teachers are called carers, were like giving him too much accommodation. He also said he was like a broken robot and he couldn't control his motion. Attention shifting slowness. This goes back to a small processor. If you got a small processor, it takes longer to shift back and forth. This is why the multitasking is such a mess, because you have to shift attention between different things. Now this really shows attention shifting slowness. This is some of the very first eye tracking software, watching an old black and white movie, and look at how many times the normal person looks back and forth. The other ones, the autistic person's looking at the mouth, but they don't look back and forth. They don't have the processor speed. And there has to be some accommodation made for being an Intel 286 in a gigachip world, sort of like that. When you're working with little kids, slow down when you talk. Always encourage the use of words. Give the kid time to respond, because they're like that phone with one bar of service. It doesn't load the website quickly. use teachable moments. That's a 50s upbringing thing. So let's say we're sitting at the dining room table and I stir my drink with my finger. Mother would say, use the spoon. People think that's disgusting when you use your finger. Give the instruction and a calm reason. Give the instruction and a calm reason. I call that teachable moment. You do that instead of screaming no. And then teaching turn taking. Lots of game playing where you learn to wait and take turns. Now, I had a huge emphasis in that in my very early program, because you got to learn how to inhibit a response. Yeah, working memory, trashed. I don't know what happened to that slide right there, but fear is the main emotion in autism, and my fear center was 3 times larger than normal. Yep, there's problems here. The sensory system sensitivity is ramped way up. Fear was my main emotion. And when I was in my 20s, I was terrified of airplanes because I was in a very scary emergency landing, and I was scared of public speaking. I walked out of my first talk. And that plane right there, that's the plane, the horrible plane. It's called a Fokker. Air traffic control sometimes thinks it was funny to say it Fokker. You got to say it carefully. Let's just leave it at that. But that's the actual name of the airplane. And when that thing put the gear down, I was sure the belly of the plane was falling out. And then aviation got interesting when I got to ride in the cockpit of this airplane, hauling Holstein heifers to Puerto Rico from the Miami airport. This was all back in the early 70s. Something you're afraid of, make it interesting, then it's less scary. Okay, as I went through my 20s, my anxiety worsened. My health deteriorated. Colitis that just wouldn't stop. I had a very stressful eye surgery that really was bad. And I started taking low doses of an antidepressant. And it worked wonders. And I wrote about it in Thinking in Pictures. Even though that's 25 years old, it's still accurate. It has a new afterword, but I didn't update the medication section because it basically hasn't changed. Yeah, there's a few new drugs, but they're just patent extenders. And they're a giant ripoff. But the mistake that's made with antidepressants, things like Prozac or Lexapro, is too high a dose. The labeled doses are too high. You need a starter dose or less than a starter dose when you're using it for anxiety. Otherwise, you're going to get agitation and insomnia. And when I went on the antidepressants, the colitis cleared up. I don't even know if I'd be alive now if I hadn't gone on the medication. I'm still on it. That's why I have to drink water. And I did the dip fat projects without medication. But I don't know if I would have become a professor. My health was being destroyed by the constant anxiety. And I found that using my squeezing machine and deep pressure did help. But the problem is, the anxiety was so high that the exercise and squeeze machine got to be like spitting on a blast furnace. There was a point where I needed better living through chemistry, the old DuPont slogan. And the chapter in Thinking in Pictures, and that's over there, is called A Believer in Biochemistry. Now, I resisted the urge of taking medication, and I had discovered it from reading an article called The Promise of Biological Psychiatry in Psychology Today. And I tracked down the journal articles, and I had 8 out of 10 of the anxiety symptoms. And I put that journal article away. I didn't like the idea of medication. Then I had the very stressful plastic surgery on my eye to take off a basal cell carcinoma on my lid. Conscious. Needles coming down like this. Knives coming down like this. Yeah, not fun. And I thought, I better go on the medicine. I did. It worked. Now there's other simpler ways to do pressure than the squeezing machine. We got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. I'm a big believer in getting kids interested in stuff. I got interested in cattle as a teenager. I didn't grow up around cattle. That started as a teenager. This is an optical illusion room that I built in the movie, that was shown in the movie. Penrose tiling, that's what Stephen Hawking used. Stephen Hawking said, concentrate on those things your disability does not prevent you from doing really well. Yeah, he could do math in his head, not much else. But I really liked what he told the New York Times. Science and nature journals. I look at this, I subscribe to these, and I look at the physics articles. I don't understand the math, but I see beautiful geometric patterns that are inside our cells, like the pores on cells. Beautiful geometric patterns, all these patterns. Yeah, let's get these in the library and just let some of the kids browse through them. Yeah, and you can let the elementary kids browse through them, because I look at all the pretty patterns that are in physics articles and things like that. Material science, all kinds of stuff. There's fractals, that's free online. Mathematics and plants. And here's some wonderful places you can get free stuff online. But what I'm trying to do is to change your attitude. Because I've been to several places that have been teaching nonverbal individuals that don't speak to type. And some of them have got a good brain locked inside there. But you've got to make sure they're typing totally independently. And the 4 books that I showed there, they definitely are. Now I think what we'll do now is we'll do questions. And I think they wanted you to line up here, or we can pass the mic around, whatever you want to do. We'll do questions for a while, and then we'll sign books.
Do you want to sit there?
Okay.
So if you have questions for the Q&A, we're going to have you all come around here to this and line up over here if you have questions.
I was just wondering, so I'm an elementary school teacher, and you're one of the remarkable people we teach about, and I was just wondering if you had any advice for elementary school students that might think differently, and if it was okay.
Elementary school kids that might be autistic?
Yeah.
Okay, one of the things we gotta be careful, you gotta remember that little slow processor. So one of the things that these kids have difficulty with is long strings of verbal instruction. That does not work. They need to be given a pilot's checklist. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. They get a job at Walmart, you don't need that, checking out the cash register at night. But long strings of verbal instruction don't work. You cannot remember sequence. It's hard for me to remember a phone number and text it at the same time. Even now. I have to write it down. Or remember a phone number and dial it. You see, that's slow processor. And I'm stuck with that. Now in engineering, it's called a worker language rather than accommodation. But the pilot's checklist is an extremely simple worker language. And if somebody thinks that's stupid, you need to remind them that when I get on a plane on Monday, and when they push it back, United's pilots have to do the checklist. It's not optional. That's not optional in aviation. So if somebody thinks that's stupid accommodation, that's what I would tell them. Because aviation thinks it's a really important thing to do.
And what advice would you have to give an autistic student?
Now, one of the things is when you need help, ask for it. One of the biggest problems we see in college now, and COVID, I think, has knocked a lot of students back. It's knocked the wind out of a lot of students. And I got to thinking, if COVID had happened to me in my 20s and wrecked my big stuff I was working on, I think it would have hurt me more than it hurt me as an old senior who wrote a book during COVID and worked with some shop puppets at the same time. And so I tell college students, if you fail a quiz or something, ask for help. I had to be tutored for every math class I took, and thank goodness they weren't algebra. They were statistics and finite math. And I asked for help. I got the math teacher to tutor me in his office. For my master's, I got a graduate student to tutor me. You see, I did something before I went down. See, and that's something kids aren't doing now. And they talk about a kid being a self-advocate. Let's be more specific. I need a pilot's checklist. And I heard, and another thing in the job place, it's very dangerous for people on inspectors when bosses change. That can be really dangerous. And when I was working for the magazine, it got sold and we got a new boss. And I didn't recognize that the new boss didn't like me. So Susie, who did the ad layout, so I think she was autistic. She said, we gotta get a big scrapbook of all your articles. And I did that, and I showed it to the new boss, to see my work. But Susie, thank you, and the ad layout lady did that for me. And that's another person who helped me. And I want to really give credit to, I would have lost that job if it hadn't been for Susie. But another guy, I think it's as if he was building fencing for years, new boss, he went yak, 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 and the guy built the fence wrong. He just said, just let me write down a little checklist of what you need to do today. Just simple, very specific accommodation. Where LED lights are flickering and the only way to get rid of that if there's no windows is you gotta buy an LED light that doesn't flicker and put it on your desk and really super bright and fly it out. Yeah, you see, but I see it. You see, the verbal thing is very abstract. We'll go after do accommodations. Now, I'm looking at very specific accommodation. Getting math to them before I failed, and getting it quickly. I did that. See, that's something specific.
Hey there, I'm just wondering, how do you successfully get through high school as an autistic person?
Okay, so in high school is an absolute mess. I got kicked out. The worst part of my life. And you're in high school now?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever had a job? You didn't get one. You're not going to think about it. You got to remember, I come out of the heavy construction industry. You got to get stuff done. And I found, I spent a lot of time in the Montfort Fab Shop. On this, I'm seeing the building now. I'm like, well, I'm crying to buy it. But there's sort of a can-do. And I recommend getting a job, and we're not going to put you on McDonald's takeout window. I want to avoid that kind of horrible multitasking. Okay, now what is your specific problem in school? Because all students ask you, how do you get over all these obstacles? Let's go one obstacle at a time. Not flunking math class. Okay, I just taught some veterinary students, and that's what I told them. Not flunking skeletal and muscle surgery was they're part of the classes. So you deal with that obstacle right now. Okay, so what problems are you having in high school?
I'm not really having any problems anymore.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. I'm loud, so. So, what I'm not really having problems right now, but I'm just concerned because I'm in my freshman year right
You're
now.
a freshman, so you're a freshman right now.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just concerned that in the future,
Don't worry about the future. One day at a time. Yeah, you have to worry about it. But right now, just do well in your freshman year. I can't worry about a tornado flattening your house or something. Because if that happens, I can't do anything about it anyway. There's a point where, okay, the meteorite's going to fall on your house or something. There's a point you just can't worry about this stuff. Or we'll get another COVID-2 or something. There's a point where you just can't worry about that. So, how's school going right now? Let's talk about right now.
it's going really good at
Good.
A's in all my classes.
You have A's in all your classes. That's just great. And just keep doing that, and maybe get a job this summer, not too hectic. Ice cream shops have been very successful because you work with one customer at a time. I wouldn't do chaotic stores at Christmas time. I want to avoid that. Retail stores that are quieter, things like that. What are you interested in?
I'm interested in languages and I want to
You like animals? Let's look at what's your dream job?
be veterinary.
You want to be veterinarian? Okay, that's a doable goal. And you'll have some math barriers. You have to be to a good algebra. You can reach the algebra, it'll be easy to get into vet school.
I mean, Algebra 1 is good right now.
It's good? Okay. Algebra 1, I never got through. Never got through Algebra 1. And today I'd have a real problem. And what would I do today if I came from a low-income background and someone waved the magic wand, I'm your age, and I'm flunked out of school, I would go in the back door. Yeah. There was a boy that went in the back door of the Amazon warehouse in Seattle. And it just so happened that some of the rocket scientists hung out in the cafeteria. He's a rocket scientist now. Yeah. You know, that's just another example. That's an old one. That's actually quite an old one. I think I heard about that 10, 15 years ago, where the marble thing and the fiberglass tank factory are kind of. But you're doing well in math right now. You see, there's a point where you can worry too much about the future. Let's keep the eye on the goal. That's the goal. You keep your eye on the goal. And when I was in graduate school and having a tough time, someone scribbled on the art building, this is back in the 70s, obstacles are those terrible things you see when you take your eyes off the goal. I've since learned Henry Ford wrote that. And you, right now, you know, it's going good. You just keep on going with your school. And there's a point where you just can't worry, what if I had a health problem? What if I had this? What if I had that? You keep your eyes on the goal. In Star Trek, it's called Prime Directive. And when I was out in construction all the time, I called it Project Loyalty. My job was to make that restrainer system work in that plant. You know, that's what I had to do. So kind of just keep right, you know. And if you do start to have trouble with the class, ask for help. That's a big mistake that students make. And so far you're all A's. Hopefully you have some friends in high school.
Yes.
Good. You see, the other thing is you got to look at the glass being half full, not half empty. And keep your eye on the goal. Because there's some veterinary students that got some few bad grades. C in a class equals DVM. If you counteract it with an A, that equals DVM. Yeah, remember that. And none of your clients may care whether you're going to see in statistics or something. Okay. Yeah, just keep your eyes on the goal. The other thing I would do, because I'm a big believer in trying on jobs, intern in some vet clinics. Maybe get a job helping out in the vet clinic this summer. So you find out what that's really all about. So you find out, is the practice of veterinary medicine what you really want to do? I call it trying on a career. Because sometimes a career is not what you think it's going to be. But try it on. You try it on, you go, yeah, I love this, or no, this wasn't for me. But do that. I would tell this to any student. And when you're in college, volunteer to help scientists with their projects, because there might be something else you might be even more interested in. But you just got to take one day at a time, and I can't worry about whether this building's going to collapse. I think the columns are big enough. But I have to say that after I'm now seeing some really hideous pictures of a squash person with a floor slab that's definitely built on top. And as somebody who's in the construction industry, I just want to get sick.
I'm a mom of 3 young, highly functional.
And how old is the kids?
Away from the spectrum, 27.
Oh, okay, this is why I've got to know. We're talking 3-year-old, okay, 27. Okay. That's why I got to know.
There seems to be, I've noticed, a big shift between how I helped them when they were younger and now as young adults, trying to fit into society. The 3 challenges that
all right, now you're talking too vague now. What challenges do they have? What's specific? Like what specific things do they have in purpose?
Catastrophizing the world events in their life, depression and social anxiety.
All right, social anxiety. See, then it gets to the point, and I think a lot of this stuff where advocates talk about burnout, there's some that need a little help from biochemistry. A little Prozac, maybe. I've been on the medication for 40 years. I'm now on my 3rd really horrible vendor that I don't know where to get it from. The stuff's giving me heartburn. But then what I did is I don't take it when I go to bed anymore. That solved the problem. I remember there's probably a problem. But instead of sort of looking like, the whole world full of problems, I can't worry about a meteorite hitting this building. I just can't. So let's just look at what we got to deal with right now. Or maybe a Chinese balloon will hit this building.
Look at one thing, they catastrophize it, as opposed to say how full, they say how empty. All
right, now one of these, he's 27 years old. What's he doing right now?
He's extremely extremely bright. He's helping as he is a engineering and math teacher.
Engineering and math, does he have a job?
Yes,
What's he doing?
teaches engineering and math.
And is he liking teaching engineering and math?
Loves it.
He loves it? Okay, good. He's got a job he loves. All right, that's the good news. And everything's going well at work with the boss and all that,
More or less.
more or less. Now, the other thing for depression, exercises, you get it.
He affords exercise.
I can tell you, every sit-up I do, I despise them. Every single one. But I find if I don't do them, I can't sleep. The medication alone is not sufficient. Burst of hard exercise, airport walking doesn't cut it. Even walking to the parking lot doesn't cut it. I need that, to keep my joints going, but you do 100 sit-ups without stopping, and it took me 3 months to work up for that. That burst of hard exercise has a benefit that just walking doesn't. And the first thing I want to do before saying go get meds is let's work on an exercise program. Do you have any equipment, Peloton or anything like that?
Yes.
All right, start using it and set it pretty stiff and do it, work up slowly, I don't want to have a heart attack. Start doing that. I believe in step by step, because one of the problems people have with medication, you start 3 meds at once, you don't know what works. You start the exercise program and med at the same time, you don't know what works. So let's just start an exercise program and just make sure you don't have a heart problem. But that might help with the depression.
How would you help catastrophizing any event plan of life, from the very smallest to the largest?
Oh, so he's worried about some little thing.
Driving is difficult.
Driving is difficult. But he can do it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then you go when there's traffic, it's not so bad. Okay, but give an example of, see, my mind only thinks in specific examples that I can visualize, but I have a huge library. So what kind of things bother you?
Someone not putting on their blinker. Someone pulling.
Okay, somebody doesn't follow the rules.
Yeah.
Okay, that's when they don't exactly follow the rules. Yeah, when they don't exactly follow the rules. And if you're in a situation where you can correct them for not following the rules, you get too many people angry. So you've got to learn it's better off sometimes not to. Okay, so that bothers them. What else bothers them?
There's some sensory things, but.
General sensory things, like what?
Well,
You see, this is where I have to do the same thing when we troubleshoot equipment, troubleshoot cattle handling problems. We had a big shadow appear at a planet called the spider monster that wasn't there in the morning. They weren't afraid to slaughter him, but at 3:30 in the afternoon, the spider monster appeared from a shadow from an overhead structure. Well, these cattle decided they weren't going to walk over the spider monster.
he wants to socialize, but just before dark. He can't go out at dark.
Can't go out at dark?
That's his rule.
Now, where does he get a rule like that?
Made it up.
He just made it up. Yeah, that's really, really rigid. Yeah, you see, and I had some things, but it's 27, but I wouldn't have. See, then you do the exercise, if you lighten up. Yeah, that's I don't know why you made that up. You see, if you work with them with logic as to why that's stupid. Well, driving at night is more scary. Okay, so I can understand that. Doesn't like to drive at night. We want to make sure he doesn't have, has he ever complained about the print jiggling on a page?
No.
Okay, so I want to make sure it doesn't have some little vision thing where driving at night is scary. But you see how I'm trying to break it down and figure out each thing so we can work on it.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to the next question.
I'm a dad of a 15-year-old and 19-year-old kids on the spectrum. And for looking at their future, my wife said she's researching and sees some schools, colleges that focus for kids that are on the spectrum.
Well, there's some people doing that, but you gotta look at what accommodations do you actually need.
And I'll say right now, it's my ninth grader. His focus is science, and he can do math. He can do algebra.
He can do math, fine, let him become an engineer then.
But he can't write.
Okay, now when I say he can't write, handwriting or composition.
He can write.
I don't care, he can type.
But it's very rough. He's done.
You don't have to have handwriting to get a job.
Yeah, and but to take his thoughts and ideas, you can ask him and quiz him about what the material is, and then if you ask him to do a topic sentence and put it in this structure and this structure, he
So
just
he can tell you all that. Now, has he ever had a job?
he has not. It's
No, they're getting a job this summer. Because I'm gonna give you the job trailer version without the story version.
His jobs are mowing the grass and shoveling snow at home.
Yeah, he needs to get a job. Pure and simple. Who do you know that owns a shop? Make it happen. Make it happen. And I have some scenes where some people kind of rough with me. There's a scene in the movie where the boss slammed down the deodorant and said, "You stink, use it." That actually happened. That scene actually happened, and the secretaries took me shopping. And they had to do a little job compression to make a 2-hour movie. It was actually construction type that did that. And they made it the boss of a magazine because it's a 2-hour movie. But that actually happened. And I mean, I worked with people that own the big shops that are on the spectrum. But what they often need is somebody to run the business. One of them, a wife running the business, the actual business part of the business, ordering materials, all that kind of stuff.
But you have an opinion, I guess, on programs in colleges that are specifically focused for kids on the spectrum?
Well, it depends how severe he is on the spectrum.
He's high functioning, but he also has been very medicated and to deal with anxiety, and he just shuts down when asked to do something he is not comfortable with doing. But
You see, this is where you gotta stretch, just a little bit. You don't put them on the takeout window, that's chucking it in the back. I don't believe in that. But what you gotta do is you've gotta stretch just a little bit and give choices. Stretch and give choices. When I got kicked out of the regular high school, my mother had worked as a journalist on kids with problems, and she picked out 3 schools to let me pick. Limited choice. Even then, I had a choice. And I like to look ahead the part. All right, let's do a couple more questions, and then we'll sign some books. It looks like people are reading, so. Okay.
So I have a grandson who's 12 for a couple of weeks. And he is autistic. He has
Okay, he's fully verbal now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, how's he doing?
He's very well spoken, but he does have issues with communication. He has a problem writing, physically writing.
Well, that's what keyboards are for, because of problems with writing. Now, the only problem I see in the future is ChatGPT and other things like that. And so some teachers may get the little blue examples out and make them write in class and strip everybody of electronics to deal with ChatGPT. So that might in the future force some writing, but I can tell you, there's the same job around it that you can't use a keyboard. That's what keyboards are for.
You know how to
I'm not gonna worry about that.
that's a big problem for school because of the teachers. And, yeah, and so it's,
And they won't let them use a laptop to type it.
yeah,
You're gonna have to come up, I can't hear. Yeah, just walk up to me closer so I can hear. Okay.
so, the other problem is, math. He's, math quiz.
A math quiz, okay.
I don't think he loves it, but he does it.
What does he like?
Playing video games.
All right, well, how you get him off the video games? Mechanics. That's been the one thing that's got them off. There's been 5 or 6 young adults where they were weaned off video games with mechanics. 3 of them, got permanent jobs. One is fixing trains for the railroad, one's changing oil on all different kinds of cars, another one's doing classic cars. But this is the one thing that is important to get them off video games. Mechanics, 4H small engine repair. Let's get them into that. Because I'm the type that gets addicted to video games. I don't think any of that stuff in the phone. Well, the little I played, it was like a drug. Well, you let them play video games on it, but the thing is you gotta replace it with something else. And my mind thinks in specific examples, but on young adults and video games, the only thing that's been really effective has been auto mechanics. You slowly wean them off the video games. It's always got to be a slow transition. You slowly, get somebody in a shop that can work with it. And this has worked. This has worked. It has to be replaced with something else.
Always working on cars.
All right, then you need to get this 11-year-old out working on the cars. That's what you need to do. Because they're working on the cars at home. They're working on cars at home. Get him out there working on cars at home. That's what you can do at home. Let's introduce him to working on cars, and he's going to find out that's more interesting than video games. You see, there it is, right in the neighborhood. Something that you can do in your neighborhood.
So then the other issue in school, and the teacher being angry
That's not how he thinks, and the teacher needs to get over it. Kids that are math and physics do the work differently. They don't do it in a verbal sequential manner, and the teacher needs to get over it. And I have heard this complaint over and over and over again. And let him just do it that way, as long as he gets the right answers, and he's not cheap. That's he doesn't have an earphone that's telling him the answer or something. Well, a good teacher leaving, that can be definitely an issue. Definitely an issue. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Okay, he doesn't have any friends?
No friends.
All right, friends who share interests. How about math friends? Maybe he's going to get car fixing friends. That might be another thing that he might get.
He does play chess once a week with himself.
All right, good. Maybe we need more chess club stuff. Let's do more chess club. Maybe you should just start a chess club. Let's just look at what we can do in the neighborhood. Now I'm seeing these beautiful chess tables that this young guy, a real young guy, those little scraps of marble they throw in the dumpster. He was taking these little scraps of marble and making gorgeous chess tables out of it. He'd come in after work, he'd learn how to use a saw, he'd make them after work. This is a real thing that's going on now. Okay, let's get another question.
Yeah, let's-
I'll get around afterwards.
Yeah, please limit it to, pardon me. Can we just limit it to one question, please? And if you're not asking a question for Q&A, please have your seat. Can we have you guys sit down in your seat? Thank you.
Okay.
9-year-old grandson was diagnosed with ADHD sensory processing disorder, kind of.
Well, that all overlaps with autism.
Right.
Now, this diagnosis is very accurate anyway.
He's been to many urologists, but he still pees. He's in his 4th grade.
He's been a neurologist and
They to see if there's some physical reason.
in other words, you can't get through the night without,
Or the day.
maybe he needs to just go to the restroom on schedule. Really try that.
They don't even know where they can Southern Hospital urologist.
And they can't find anything wrong with that. Everything is fine.
He doesn't care and he's not. That's Sorry.
Maybe somebody here's had some experience with it. All right.
Okay? Yeah.
All right, I want you two to get together and solve this problem. That's one of the reasons why you go to meetings, because you can talk to people to network with and find solutions to problems. Okay, let's take a couple more quick ones and I think we'll end.
I'm just curious, I have a very friend group and I like board games. I'm just interested if you have any favorite board games that you would recommend playing.
Well, I didn't hear some of that. Come up closer, man. Besides death, that's why I'm turning. Okay.
Do you have any board games or games that you would recommend?
Well, when I was, when we played Parcheesi and, one of those different board games. I don't do any board games now, but those games we thought were fun when I was a kid. And what about Dungeons and Dragons? That'd be something that'd be fun. Maybe some of the other people have some suggestions. What do you like to do? To have stuff to do.
My family, we're all autistic. We absolutely love Ticket to Ride and Summers in Japan. Those are like absolute secrets. So if you haven't checked those out, I recommend them. And I'll just spin off some Catan.
Okay, these are all board games.
Yeah.
Okay, you know about stuff that I'm definitely not expert in. But again, that's why we come to meetings, so you can make these kind of connections. Okay?
My son is 12. He's resistant to trying new things.
Let them want to try new things.
I'm fine.
Give them choices to do things, right? Give control. When I had to go to special school, we gave me a choice out of 3 of them checked out. Give choices. We go to Target or Walmart.
Well, we want to send him to a summer camp where he can have.
All right, then he gets to pick out 2 summer camps you like and let him have a choice.
He's very resistant to anything and he will refuse and put his foot down and then it turns to tantrums and like he will say, no, I'm not.
Well, what's happened with a lot of kids, they're scared to go to summer camp and then they like it. Like when I had the opportunity to come to my aunt's ranch, I was afraid to go. Mother says you have a choice. You can stay for a week, if you hate it, come home, or stay all summer. I got out there and I loved it. And I've heard similar stories about summer camp. Got out there and loved it. So we give them a choice of camps, and after a few, week, and you hate it, you can come back home.
So just say if you're going, but you can.
Yeah, what I would do is we'll give you a choice of camps, and you're going to go for at least for 1 week. And at the end of that week, you can decide to come home or stay. That's exactly what was done with me. Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll go do some books, and I want to thank everybody.